All right, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to have you back for another of our interview series on the new paradigm of business. Hopefully the sound's a little better today. We've been working on some of the technology stuff since last time. We're out here on the bleeding edge working with this stuff. I'm very excited. Howard Behar is with us. We just managed to get his iPad connected to the Google Hangout moments ago. So he's ready to answer questions live when this broadcast is over. So what's going to happen is first we're going to show you the interview, and then after that we'll come back and we'll answer your questions live. So here's the interview. Enjoy. All right, welcome everybody to another of our interviews in my ongoing video series on the new paradigm of business. I am thrilled to be joined today by Howard Behar, who's the former president of Starbucks Coffee. Now, Howard, as I understand it, when you took over at Starbucks, there were 28 stores. Is that right?
That's true. It was a very small company, losing money.
And were there any stores outside of Seattle at that time?
Yeah, there were. We had a couple of stores in Chicago because that's where Howard Schultz his wife had grown up in Illinois, and then we had a few stores in Vancouver, British Columbia. So we were an international company.
Technically speaking.
Technically speaking.
That's great. And so you really took that company from the 28 stores losing money to the juggernaut it is today, where people even joke about going 2 blocks and finding another Starbucks.
And who would have ever thought?
And you opened Japan and Europe and really spread it all around the world. Good. Well, and Howard, in addition to that, Howard's written this lovely book. It's not about the coffee. Here's my copy here. And this is where you spell out all the various leadership principles you've used in order to achieve that success. And that's some of what we're going to talk about today. You're also on the board of the Greenleaf Institute for Servant Leadership. And I believe you speak on that topic a lot, right? You speak at conferences and corporations and do public speaking about servant leadership. Is that accurate?
I do, yeah, about leadership in general with the context of servant leadership, yeah.
Cool. And then you're also a leadership chair at the business school at the University of Washington. Is that right, too?
I was, yeah, I had that for a year. I'm chair of the University of Washington Foundation and sit on a number of both for-profit and not-for-profit boards.
Excellent. Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Now, as you know, this whole video series is about clarifying the current paradigm of business and seeking to clarify the new paradigm of business as the world goes through this big shift. And so one of the things that you talk about a lot about the current paradigm of business is the pathological way that organizations view their employees, seeing them as assets, seeing them as a resource, if you will, the whole idea of a human resource as something that you're going to allocate or use or something. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, well, whenever I hear that word asset, you know, you hear it a lot, and I've used it too. People are most important asset. I always know that leaders don't get it because human beings are not assets. You know, assets are buildings and computers and trucks and things like that, and pretty much assets give you everything that you expect, usually every time that you expect it.
And you can sell them too, right?
Yeah, you can buy and sell them, right. Exactly, you own them. But human beings you don't own, and human beings, we never give each other what we expect. It's always in flux, you know. There's this desire in organizations, and particularly in businesses, to have human beings do the same thing every time, all the time. And that's not the way it is. You know,
well, that's a reliable person, right? The person's reliable means that they give you what you expect from them.
Yeah, I always joke, particularly with sales leaders. I said, so if somebody came in and gave you a surprise order for $1 million, would you reject it and be mad? You know, they didn't quite give you what you expected, did they? Right. They gave you something unusual. You know, when we talk about it, we usually only talk about it in the context of things people do wrong, and we always want to control those.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So, because there's the uncontrolled, unexpected good result too.
Yeah, they go both ways, and you have to take the good and the bad. Otherwise, the good never comes.
Now let's enter this sort of classic command and control oriented mindset for a moment. That would explain why I would rather have machines than people doing the work, right? If I'm seeking predictability and repeatability, if I want a process that's always going to yield the same quality result, wouldn't I want to remove all the people from the equation and just have machines do everything?
Yeah, we go after perfection, and perfection doesn't, I mean, I want perfection when somebody's operating on me, and so we have robotic surgery. On the other hand, I want a human being to look at all the things that could possibly be wrong with me, to talk to me about what my options are, to give me the human stuff. And I think we kind of are trying to mush both of those concepts together, and I think they're to a detriment of humanity.
Great. And so now, why would I, as a business leader, why do I want all these unpredictable, unmanageable people who never give me what I expect? Why do I want all these people in my organization? What's the benefit?
The benefit is creativity. The benefit is seeing things that robots can never see. I don't care how great robots become or robotics become. Human beings make connections that computers are never going to be able to make. We can look at somebody's face, just as simple as creating a relationship with another human being, and we look at their eyes, and we can see what's there, and either the warmth or the rejection or those kinds of things. We also are able to, human beings can put seemingly disparate things together, ways that computers can't do, because they will not be able to make those connections that are not always obvious. And so human beings provide creativity, and I think we need it all. I don't think it's either or. I think the genius is, as Jim Collins likes to say, is in the and how we're going to put those two things together. But there's always this piece of business leaders, they just don't want a mistake. They want everything to be perfect, and it's not kind of a life I want to lead. And I don't think human beings really want to do it.
Yeah. Well, I know that psychologically speaking, if you put someone under a microscope and try to inspire perfection, it creates a whole inner critical process, and people start to tear themselves down, or the boss tears them down, or they imagine the boss is tearing them down, and it throws them into a very small part of their brain and stress, and then they're constantly looking over their shoulder, constantly worried about making a mistake, trying not to get fired, keeping their heads down, the old CYA acronym, right, covering their ass, and then all the creativity's gone out the window.
I totally agree with that. I think one of the issues that we're facing today is this life of what I like to call transaction, not interaction. And there's a difference between an interaction and a transaction. So you might take an internet company that sells products on the internet, and everything is perfect, right? You enter your name, and you can even one-click your credit card or all that stuff, and the item comes delivered to you in a day, maybe even the same day. You never interact with a human being. And anytime there's a problem, the computer, the customer types in, I don't like this, it goes back to somebody's boss, and somebody's boss sends an email to the person that's in charge with just a question mark. Why were you imperfect? And so we think that's an interaction. It's not. It's just a transaction. Right. And so the joy, and I do mean the joy of human interactions, even when there's a problem, is, to me, better than a transaction where there's no human interaction. There's no caring. We don't hear a voice. We don't see eyes. Now, I'm not saying we should do away with the sales on the internet. It's not my point. My point is we have to find ways of making sure that we don't lose the human interactions.
Right. So now, what's the effect? Because I think you've seen this both in Starbucks and in other companies. What's the effect on the bottom line when we get this? So actually, before we go there, so here I am. I'm a leader. I drink this, Kool-Aid that you're offering here, and I think, okay, good. All right, I believe it. I see what Howard's doing. I think he's got it right. What do I go do exactly? Well, I walk into work the next day and I'm converted. You've convinced me. What's different?
Well, think that it's all in our own behavior as leaders. It's from the simplest things. There's a word we use this word called love, and a word called caring, and a word called authenticity and transparency, and those are good words and they have good meanings. And but we continue to move away from those things, and I think leaders have to move towards those things. Caring organizations that are built on love, on human emotion, allow us to have transactions and interactions.
I'm reminded of books like Firms of Endearment or Can't Buy Me Like or things like that, where we're dealing with business as an emotional interaction as opposed to purely a financial one.
Yeah, and why is it important? We talk about in the context of success of organizations, whether business, not-for-profit, it doesn't make any difference. It's important because each of us goes home at night. Many of us go home to significant others, to spouses, to children. Some of us go home to friends, whatever it happens to be. Our lives are all dependent upon the interactions that we have with those people. And we need to live life on one continuum, not on work and home, but on the combination of the two. And if we're spending 8 to 10 hours a day on transactions, there can be a tremendous spillover to our personal life where we think it's all about transactions. Right?
You do this for me. People in our family transactionally and showing up at home in that same vein that we've been doing at work.
Exactly. And then we wonder why our children are losing interest in school. We wonder why our political system is breaking down. We wonder why we continue to have wars and all those things because,
why my spouse is having an affair or wants to divorce me.
Yeah, exactly, because it's the whole of interaction. So companies or organizations, I believe, have a responsibility to help human beings have better interactions. And that starts, at least in organizations, in the workplace. And so a leader has to be emblematic of that, has to be a model for that, has to be comfortable in that.
So as a leader, I can model and teach good relationship skill, good relationship practice, being open, being transparent, being vulnerable, expressing emotion, showing caring and concern for other people.
Exactly.
That then bleeds over into the rest of their lives and makes the world a better place.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about being, all about being nice. There's this misconception that servant leadership is all about being nice. Sometimes it's about asking for what you need. Sometimes it's, sometimes showing anger. It's all of the things. Challenging. It's all of the things that make us human beings. And those things cross over between our home life, our life with our friends, our life with our parents, whatever it has, children, our spouses, and our work life. And when we keep trying to separate those two things, somewhere we're dehumanizing.
Yeah. Well, I think business is very guilty of dehumanizing things in general, dehumanizing the employees, right, as assets, dehumanizing the customers as targets. I love that language.
Yeah, right.
Target, right? I always get an image of crosshairs when I hear that term.
Yeah, exactly. Right? That's it. There are, target.
Gonna shoot them. Now, so I believe you. I go back to work as a business leader. I'm a CEO, and now I'm going to practice transparency and openness. And I can see, by the way, the connection between perfection, right? If I have a standard of perfection I'm applying to others and jacking them up whenever it's not met, then implicitly I'm applying the same standard of perfection to myself. And now I don't want to admit when I've made a mistake.
Exactly.
And now I'm not going to be transparent. Now I'm going to hide it and come up with some story to cover an error I created, rather than publicly be vulnerable by showing that I made an error and coming clean about it. I can see how all that ties together. Now I'm doing all this, so what's the effect on the bottom line? So I know you've seen Starbucks go through this transition, and with some straying along the way also, and also other organizations as well. What does it do to the bottom line when the leaders are behaving this way?
Well, I'm always always cautious about that question. I think the question is not, just tell me what you mean, so to speak, by a bottom line. If your bottom line is just economics, if that's solely how you measure what the bottom line is, then I would never say that the only way to get a big bottom line is through servant leadership or being caring or love or all those things. I mean, we've all seen lots of organizations that are led by, people that don't care about other people, and they've made lots of money, and we can all name those.
And the converse is true. People who really do care, who led companies into the ground.
Yeah, I think the question is what's the bottom line for our society? What's the bottom line for our culture? And it's made up, when you really look at it, in multiple pieces. It's how we contribute to our communities in an organization. It has to be part of that. This idea that we don't have to worry about that is ridiculous. If we don't have healthy communities, and I mean healthy from all definitions of the word, then we're not going to have healthy businesses. They go together. And if you don't think that's the case, look around the world with the societies that are being torn apart and ask the business people how well they're doing. They're not doing so well. And we take for granted that in the United States because, we have relative harmony and peace and all those things. But if all of a sudden we had anarchy, if we had people with in our political classes, instead of just yelling at each other, shooting each other, right, it would be a totally different story.
Well, and actually the same is true here as well, because if you go around the U.S., the places that are more dangerous, the places where things are going poorly, are the areas that are economically depressed. I remember Harlem in the 1920s was a very thriving place where there were lots of businesses owned by blacks. It was a safe place for whites to go. People would go there to be entertained and to participate in the clubs and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't until after the Great Depression, when the bottom fell out economically, that Harlem became a dangerous place.
I mean, look at Detroit. So the question of the bottom line, how does it affect the bottom line? Tell me what you value as results on the bottom line, right? If it's only money, then forget it. But there's so many pieces that actually make up a bottom line that we really don't talk about, that's where the danger is. And so I've seen it both ways. Now, if you say I want to look at a bottom line across multiple pieces, economic, societal, community,
and growth and development of the employees.
Growth and development, all the things. Then I will tell you that the effect on the bottom line, by respect for people, by caring, love, accountability, all the things that go into make a productive organization, they all matter.
Right. Now, the reason I'm asking about this specifically is not because that's the only measure that talks to me at all, but because I have a theory that in order for business to transition to the new paradigm successfully, the new paradigm ways of doing it must work at least as well as the old paradigm ways of doing it at the old measures, because that then makes an ironclad case for moving forward, right?
Well,
if I'm trying to tell people we should be nice, we should be good, and by the way, you'll lose money doing it, it's not the best incentive to move forward, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I would, you and I have talked and traded a couple of emails on this idea, is this a new paradigm or is it not?
Right.
I don't believe that we're really talking about a new paradigm here. I think the paradigm is as old as the hills. And I think over time we have seen productive, healthy organizations understand that this is a human journey.
Right.
And they have been successful in having organizations that have lasted over long periods of time.
Yeah.
So I think why we're talking about this for today is simply, like you and I are using Skype right now.
Yeah.
Is that we're able to more easily today. The organizations such as Conscious Capitalism, as Servant Leadership, as the Compassionate Action Network, many organizations are starting to say, wait a minute, we need to think a little bit differently about this. And And society is saying there's got to be more to this than just a bottom line, and it's happening because of some of the tools that we have today, social networks for kids, and well, it's not even for kids anymore. I mean,
companies live in fear of social networks, actually, because if they do something wrong, suddenly it's all over the internet. So
yeah. So, and this mistaken belief that it's hard-nosed business people that get results. Is that true? Sure. There are some hard-nosed business people that get results, but we all know lots of companies that have been hard-nosed, that have driven for results, that yell and scream at their people, that have struggled. Some of the biggest ones in our country that are existing today. And the question becomes, whenever I talk to leaders of those kinds of organizations, they say, tell me what your home life is like. Do you go home once a year and sit down with your spouse and say, honey, this is your lucky day. This is going to be your performance review day. And there's been some things that you've done really well, but unfortunately, there's some things that you're not doing so well, and we need to talk about those things. As your ass is bouncing out the front door, right? You wouldn't do that with your kids either. I mean, some of the greatest minds in our society that create the biggest internet companies or the biggest technological companies don't go home and not love their children. Are there some? Sure. But they don't. They go home, they're trying to help their children grow, they try to create a family that's caring and loving. What's the difference between home and work? Nothing.
And how do what do we do that gives ourselves permission to behave that way in the workplace when we would never behave that way in our personal life? Hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Yeah. I really don't know. I've had, it's amazing how, when I was working, we would give awards out to people, and I'd have spouses come up to me and say to me, God, are they really that nice at work? We see it both ways. And I've seen the opposite. Where somebody's been fired that have had to let somebody go because they just could not understand how to value other human beings. And I talk to their spouses later, and they'd say, God, he's such a great father and a caring husband. And this idea that somehow we have to be different in each place. And I think that if we can find this way to connect both, then we can get to the real bottom line.
This brings up a pet peeve of mine, which is when people talk about being professional. When there's a conflict or something going wrong, they say, well, let's be professional about this, which basically means let's leave all emotion out of it. Let's pretend that none of us have any feelings at all and deal with it purely as a transaction. As if that were possible, first of all, and as if it were desirable, second of all, that it would actually produce a useful outcome to ignore everyone's emotions.
It's impossible. First, I don't care who you are, right? It may not be on your face because you've become so good at hiding it. It may not even be in your voice because you've been able to manipulate that. Somewhere inside that board of directors that sits on your shoulders, that's influencing all your intellectual powers, your emotional stuff. There's emotion going on.
And then it leaks. It leaks all over the place. And it's something I know as a leader, you cannot hide it from the people who work for you. They are taking a shower in it every day when you come to work. Whatever you think you're hiding, you're not. And they're living.
Yeah, and you really can't hide it at home, can you?
No.
I'm always amazed that when my wife Lynn looks at me and, all of a sudden you can see the question in her eyes, and she's thinking, what is he thinking? And she knows right where I'm at. I don't have to have said a word.
Right. What's up, dude? Don't try to tell me nothing's going on. Just tell me what it is. Let's cut to the chase here.
Isn't that the most wonderful thing? Isn't that amazing about human beings? When our antenna becomes so good that we're able to interact and relate with each other and have a sense of where that other human being is at. There's nothing better than that.
So here, now I'm going to challenge you on that paradigm piece, which is that in effect what we're doing is we're talking about how these all-powerful hierarchical leaders ought to behave differently and use their power in a more humanistic way, with more compassion, more emotion, more transparency. And I'm reminded of what must have been a similar conversation 400 years ago about monarchs, right? That here we have these all-powerful monarchs, and if we could just get them to be kinder and gentler to their people and wield their all-powerful power responsibly, then that would be better. But we took a different path. We changed the system so no one had that much power, and now the people in England aren't worried about being beheaded by Queen Elizabeth, right? It can't be done. Doesn't happen.
Right.
So, isn't hierarchy part of the issue? Isn't taking a very small number of people, giving them massive amounts of power, an invitation to abuse?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any question about that. That happens today. We were just reading the paper this morning about the North Korean guy who just killed his uncle, yep. Right? All over power. So the same.
And he seemed like a nice guy when he came to power, right? And it's only been, less than a year? Or I don't know.
Yeah, less than a year, but there's no question about that, is that how we set up our systems influence, how people exercise power. And I think that's where the thing that we're talking about in the paradigm shift is saying, here's what servant leadership looks like, here's what conscious capitalism looks like, or compassion looks like in the workplace. And these are the things that are okay, and these are the things that are not. And we continue to try to drive that within our organizations. Now, the human species, as such as we are, there's always going to be that king or queen that is going to pop up someplace and absolutely believe that their way is the way.
Yeah.
And somebody is going to hand over, people are going to advocate. And I think our job is, my job is to say it's not okay to advocate your responsibility and to give your power away.
Now, how do we make that systemic? Because as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, I know this is true about consciousness, and I believe it's also true about servant leadership, that both of those systems still employ hierarchy as the organizational structure. Is that true?
Sure.
Now, doesn't that then naturally concentrate power? And now we're again very carefully monitoring the person we give all that power to, as opposed to distributing it by using a different organizational structure.
Right. I think that's true, and I'm not smart enough to figure out what the other structure should be. We've seen other structures work.
Yeah.
I would say if you look at the U.S. military today, what you would say is a very hierarchical structure. Yeah. But if you look at what really happens in the field,
yeah.
The military today, the power is continually being moved down, and it used to be, you'd say to a lieutenant, take that hill, and here's how I want you to do it.
Right.
And in today's world, what we're doing is, and we see the military doing, is saying our objective is to take that hill. Here's why we need to take it. Here are the tools that you have available. Here are the things we've learned. We're going to practice about the things we've learned. But when you get in the middle of that hill and you think and see that you have to make a different decision, make it.
Yep.
And you see, it's an odd place for it to happen. Now, there still is a hierarchical structure.
It's not as odd as you might think. The military actually has often been an innovator in leadership. They take leadership deadly seriously, literally, yes. For obvious reasons. And so they really stay on the cutting edge of what's going on. They have a terrible reputation because of all the psychological projection people do on what they believe the military is. But I can think of two extreme situations. One was the Falklands War, where the U.S. gave the British Army satellite phones when that stuff was relatively new. And they had the soldiers in the field in contact with Margaret Thatcher back in London, and it was a disaster. It didn't work at all. It just created the most perfect environment for micromanaging, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And on the flip side of it, the extreme opposite one was in Afghanistan, the Special Forces, U.S. Special Forces, did a fascinating thing. Every unit in the field had a webmaster. And they would go online, and there was all these secure websites, and each unit had its own website, and the webmasters were constantly updating their position and their tactical situation on the websites, so the other units could see, oh look, this other unit's only 10 kilometers away, they're in a firefight with these guys. If we come around here, we can help them. And there was all this collaborative decision making going on in real time. And the guys back at headquarters are just watching the websites to keep up with what's happening.
Yeah. Well, okay, there it is. Yep. And so you say, what brings success? At the end of the day, that's what's always really brought success. I like to say that we're saluting the wrong flags. We're saluting the flags of power and of what we see as leadership when everybody is a leader. Now, sometimes, depending on what the question is, what the situation is, somebody has to be able to make a particular decision. What the IPO price of a company is going to be. But I have this adage that I always like to say, the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom.
Yep,
so somebody that sweeps the floor won't be deciding what the IPO price is. Right? But the CFO probably, or the CEO is going to. But neither should the CEO be deciding what kind of broom to use to keep a floor clean. And so.
Yeah, that's a great principle that's used in holacracy, one of the non-hierarchical systems where you give people domains. And in that domain, the person is the absolute ruler, and no one else can tell them what to do. And the question is, then we have to be really clear about who's got which domain.
Yeah, exactly, because everybody, we're all guilty. We all want to be able to make all our decisions all the time. And it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, this idea of perfection. Right? Leaders are so worried about making a mistake, how they will look in front of the public, right? That they think that if they have absolute control, they keep that from happening. But as we know, that doesn't work. It never works. So it's look, it's not easy. It's complicated. But what do we know? What do we know without a question? Give human beings freedom within a context, right? Give them all the information you can give them. Give them the truth. Talk about what you're trying to do. Try to get them to latch on to the greater purpose of the organization with them participating in it. And people will use their creativity and their energy and their passions to move the organization forward towards its ultimate goals, which will affect its bottom line.
Now, do you believe that having that higher purpose for an organization is an essential component in order to get the best out of people?
Absolutely. I mean, that old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there, and that applies to purpose. And purpose doesn't have to be some, esoteric thing that all the future people in the world will look on that purpose and say, God, was that a great purpose? No, it can be simple things. It can be simple things. Purpose can be that's not so simple, but to treat the people you're serving like human beings. That's our greater purpose, that we want to have good human interactions with everybody. It can be a greater purpose that, we're going to solve how waste is in our houses, right?
Yep.
We're going to be a zero waste home, right? And so you get 3 children, and a husband, a wife, and we all are focusing on that purpose, on that greater purpose. That's how we're going to contribute to the world.
Now,
have to be.
I believe that purpose only works if the leaders feel a lot of passion and commitment to it. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what about values? What role does values play? Because I think you're a big fan of them, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, values are important. What matters to you? And not just the word. The word's easy. You can say, one of my core values is I want honesty. Well, honesty, the word itself, has got a lot of, you get 100 people, and they all say, I want to be an honest person. But what honesty is to each individual is different. And sometimes it's age-related, sometimes it's lots of different things. But, when I was 27 years old to 26 years old working for an organization, I wouldn't think twice about going into the supply closet and grabbing a couple of legal pads and putting them in my briefcase.
Yep.
At 69, I wouldn't do that. I've changed as I've gotten older. And I'm not saying one was right and one is wrong. It's
a question of what standard you're applying to yourself.
Yeah, and so I have decided over time that I have tried to limit the room of my interpretation of what honesty means to me. And sometimes there are prices to pay with that. I mean, it's simple little things. It can be funny sometimes. My wife Lynn will go buy a dress, and it's a beautiful dress, and she comes home and she's excited and she wants to model it and show it to me, and she puts on the dress, and the first question she asks is, she says, "Honey, does this make my butt look big?" Now, it's funny, right? It is a funny question.
It's a classic question.
It's a classic question. So I've had to decide what's the answer going to be. Am I going to look at her and say, I know she loves the dress, and I made a decision, and it's not always been easy, because she sometimes can get mad. She spent the whole day looking for a dress, but I say, yeah, it does. Now, that's a funny little thing, but those things are going on throughout all our day. Some more important, some less important, and so I have tried to find. So the word honesty by itself has no meaning unless you give it meaning. And you say, what are my actions going to be that align with my value, my definition of that word, of that value, honesty? And so do you ask me, are values important? Yes, they are, extremely important. I don't think we can do anything without being thoughtful about what they are.
Yeah, and I think that there's the investing it with meaning and then investing the meaning with action, right? There's really two. So I have to sit down and interpret it myself, and then I have to ask, if I really believe that, what would I be doing differently? It's an interesting question. I've made the same decision with my wife, and she knows that she's got to be careful which questions she asks.
At the end of the day, the person that we have to answer to, the most important person that we have to answer to is us. You got to be able to go home and look at yourself in the mirror every night. And it's a simple question to ask. How did I do today? How did I do today against this set of values, against my greater purpose? And there are many days when I look in the mirror and I ask that question, and I'm disappointed with myself. I didn't do what I could have done. Now, I have chosen to not feel bad so much anymore, but to rather understand and ask the second question, how will tomorrow be different?
I think that's important, because if I use that to flagellate myself and abuse myself because I did poorly, then that's a pretty strong disincentive to do the practice. And I've done the same thing, which is to try to be as honest as possible while being as kind as possible to myself, and say, okay, wow, I really screwed that up, and then not beating myself up with it, and then say, okay, and how, if I had that to do over again, how would I wish I had done it? And therefore, when it does happen again, how will I do it differently next time?
So let's take that back to leadership, to one of the questions you asked. So a leader has a choice here. You have the values of the organization, you have the greater purpose, mission, whatever it is. How do you act or react when someone in your organization doesn't quite measure up? Right? That's depending on what it is. If somebody steals from your organization, probably as a leader, you're going to have less room for that. Let's say somebody, with the best of intentions, trying to live up to the greater purpose of the organization, makes a tactical mistake. But that's somewhat, could be somewhat significant.
Right.
And you put a coupon on the internet, and you didn't realize that coupon could be copied, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of those coupons out, and the company has to backtrack.
Right.
So, but the leader all along has been saying, what I really value in the people that work in this organization is their creativity, and I want you to use their creativity to put this organization forward. But
innovate, take risks.
They use this creativity, and they made a mistake. So it is really critical now how the leader reacts in that situation. right? And I've seen it both ways. I've seen the leader go crazy
Yep.
and totally react with total disregard for what the leadership had said before. I want you to be creative.
And actions speak louder than words. Once they
They
do that
do.
once, it tells everybody the next time they say, go be creative, everyone's going,
Yeah, and then they're going to say,
remember what happened to Steve?
yeah, exactly. And remember what Joe, the boss, did when Steve made that happen?
Yep.
And all of a sudden, you start to create an organization that says, yeah, creativity, right. I'm going to go get permission before I do anything because I want cover.
That's right. Yeah, and it's a challenging thing because it's important to give the person the feedback and to help them to see the result of their action, but to do it in as kind a way as possible so that they actually learn from it as opposed to feeling abused.
Yeah.
And that's tough to create an environment in which that happens, in my experience.
Yeah. And the lesson shouldn't be don't ever make a mistake again. The lesson is the learning is it's a bunch of questions. Knowing what you did and what happened, what would you do differently today? Right? Is there anything that you would have done differently? And let's talk about that.
Yeah, and because given the situation we're now in, what recommendations do you have about how we should clean it up?
Yeah, how do we fix it? And so that's all.
Yeah. I love it. Well, this has been great. I think we're getting close to the end of our time here because we want to leave time for Q&A. So I really appreciate the time, Howard. Again, I want to put in another plug for your book here. I love this. The leadership principles, the ones that you've talked about here, and many more are very well articulated in there. I had a lot of fun looking through that, so thank you for that. And if people want to learn more about you or to hire you to speak at their conference or something, it's howardbehar.com, right?
It's a yes or my initials hb@howardbehar.com, but they can get to the website too.
Okay, good. Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, Howard, and I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope people take your message to heart and go out and lead kinder, gentler, more transparent organizations.
Thank you very much. And yeah, here's to being conscious about our actions.
To being conscious about our actions, I'll raise a virtual glass.
All right, great.
Okay, thank you so much, Howard. Let me unmute Howard here. Okay, Howard, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Let's make sure we can hear you.
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Good. Okay, so we've already got questions coming through. Before we start taking questions from the viewers, I'm just curious if, after seeing that interview, again, any thoughts, anything you want to add, anything you want to underscore from that?
Yeah, I talk too much. I think that how it ended is you got to be conscious about what you're doing and the actions that you take. And leadership has even a bigger responsibility to be conscious about the things they say and the things they do, because the effect on their organizations are immense. It's whether it be in a family, whether it be in a business or whatever kind of institution or organization, leadership has a huge responsibility. Not easy.
Thank you, Howard. And I that's actually one of the definitions I use of evil, is pursuing one's own interests with disregard for the impact, right? Trying to fulfill my own needs and not taking into account how that impacts others. It actually works pretty well in most situations as a definition of evil. Good. So let me start reading you some of the questions we're getting over the chat, and feel free, folks, to enter more here underneath where you're watching the video. There's a little chat widget down there. So the first question is, could it be the industrial economy that dehumanized the workplace? And this is someone noticing that you're speaking about a return to traditional values, and I'm talking about creating a new paradigm, which are not, in my view, a paradox at all. I think that some of the new paradigm is stuff of old values that we've lost. So anything about that, about the industrial economy dehumanizing the workplace you want to offer?
Yeah, I don't think that I would agree with that necessarily. I would say, that, no question, the fact that we are in crammed together in urban areas today where there's just a tremendous intensity to life and to all of that, certainly probably has caused a difference. Now, I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't grow up in a rural part of the United States. I don't speak with expertise on it. But I think that these are human issues. I don't think they're that new. I think that if you look throughout history, even before the Industrial Revolution and the urbanization took place, I think people struggled with people. They struggled with themselves, and they struggled in the organizations that they had. And maybe it was a little easier because there were less people jammed together. But, you know, at least in the last few thousand years, people have been jammed together, and they've had political issues, and the Greeks and the Romans and certainly have struggled. And so I don't think it's, I think that would be a cop-out. I think that would be saying, gee, if we only could get rid of the Industrial Revolution and we didn't have all these things we're doing, somehow life would be better.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking about interviewing a medieval serf or a legionnaire in the 200 AD Roman army or something like that. And I'm sure they'd have a list of complaints about how their leaders were treating them.
Exactly.
Good. I will say this about the industrial economy. It's not the industrial economy per se, but some of the mindset that leadership acquired through the Industrial Revolution about how, excuse me, about how to model human behavior and therefore how to treat people, I do think has had a negative contribution, specifically a behaviorist psychological viewpoint of people and also economists modeling them in a very mechanistic sort of way, saying, well, if we put this input, then the person will do this behavior, and sort of designing compensation systems and extrinsic rewards in order to manipulate behavior. I think there has been a dehumanizing effect of that. That's a new feature in addition to the traditional stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, no question. I mean, that belief that somehow there is some compensation program out there that just works in every situation and everybody's. I've been doing this for 50 years. You know how many compensation programs I have devised or had other people have devised? And the truth is, it's not compensation programs that connect people to what they're doing, right? It's a belief that the purpose is greater than themselves and they are justly rewarded. So, but that's been, throughout history, trying to manipulate other people through something.
Yep. Trying to find the right lever or knob or switch to get them to behave the way I want to. We've got another question from Marcela Rodriguez, who's a international consultant from South America. I actually know her. Could you please share with us some of the initiatives that you've implemented that have been the most impactful to build and internalize the culture you're talking about? So what are some of the ways that you spread this through the organization? What are the activities? And this is someone who would, actually works with large companies and would be likely to use the things that you say.
Well, I've got one for you. It's pretty simple, right? It's just what we would do at home. Every day acknowledge the importance of and how much you care about the people that you're working with. Just try, if you have a significant other or married or living with somebody, just try every time your significant other says, I love you, mumble something unintelligible back. It's the most basic of things. We don't need big systems and programs to create great environments, whether it be, again, at home or in a workplace. Try saying I love you once in a while. Try saying thank you for being you. Send a birthday card. Send a company anniversary card. Ask how their children are doing. Ask how their spouse is doing. Ask how they are doing. Ask what you can do to help them have a better life. And that's what bosses need to do. Now, somebody may say, well, Howard, how do you do that in a big organization? That's really simple. You do it one person at a time and you get everybody doing it. And that's what builds culture.
Yeah, I'm reminded, Hewlett-Packard used to be really good at this, and I'm reminded of some research on couples that says that you can predict very accurately whether a couple will make it or not, whether they'll get divorced or stay together, based on the ratio of supportive, kind things they say to one another versus criticisms they say to one another. So if it's got to be at least 5-to-1 positive to negative, and then the relationship will make it. And so I just wonder, like walking around in a corporation with a little meter checking what that ratio is of how many positive versus negative things most managers say to the people who are working for them.
Yeah, I think that's true. If the questioner wants a little tool or a tactic, one of the best things that I've seen done over a number of companies was an award and recognition system that isn't given out by leadership, but that people give to each other for some specific action that they took. And you can define those any way that you want. Somebody that cared, somebody that contributed. So you choose whatever you want. And individuals in the organization give those to anybody anytime they want. And the more, the better. I want to see them out there all the time. I used to do one thing every day. I'd have balloons delivered. Actually, I finally got so I'd have my own helium tank, and we'd blow up balloons, and they were just thank you balloons. And every day I'd go out and deliver 2 or 3 thank you balloons, and then we'd tie them to people's chairs. And we just say thank you for being you. Thank you for doing such a good job on that project. Thank you for being kind, whatever it is. And that balloon would stick up in the air, right? And everybody could see it no matter where they walk, all different color balloons. It's little things. It's not big things.
Good. And I love the way you're saying that. It's sort of just this blanketing of the organization with love in this way, because often what I see in CEOs is a more calculated way of dishing out praise or awards or rewards or that kind of thing. So where it's really designed to manipulate behavior and get a certain response. They're saying, okay, if I praise this behavior and this behavior and this behavior and send this email, then that's going to motivate these people. And it's much more calculated. It's not like you're saying, not a personal response, not like in a family or a relationship or a friend. Like I don't give my friend a birthday present or not, depending on how they performed in the last year.
I'd come at this, it's an interesting thing, but I think when you do the small things really well and you're really conscious about what you're doing there and caring about people in an authentic and real way, then you can do the other things. Then you can have the President's Award, or the Vice President's Award, or the Service Award. You can have those things because people know that they're real. They're not just some program to recognize people, because I think those things are important too. I think you've got to do it all. It's not one. Life is about details. Life is about doing all the things. Not that we do them all well, but always do the right thing. But life is about the details, and in order to have a program of awards and recognition, you've got to do the caring and love first.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, there's a risk if I do the programmatic recognition with the intent of improving people's morale, that it won't necessarily work. That can actually really backfire. And I could see how leaving out the personal touch, it actually makes it more likely to backfire. We have another question here coming from someone else asking about, so you were very, very clear that modeling this behavior is absolutely the most important thing, and modeling it repetitively day after day after day and doing it a lot. Very, very clear. Now, was there specific leadership development that you did as well in order to move this down through the ranks of the leaders in the organization?
Yes, for that question. At Starbucks and a couple other companies that I'd been at, Starbucks, we called it Star Skills. And it was what I would call not a leadership development program, but a human development program. It was about helping people to understand how they can work and live more effectively with other human beings. And it taught what we called star skills. They were human skills, skills about caring in an authentic way, skills about recognizing in an authentic way, skills about how you treat another human being. And those star skills, they could be used at home, at work. They're universal. They have nothing to do with business. I think we talk way too much about business well, a word that I don't like, which is the word training, because I think you train pets. I don't think you train human beings. I think you educate and develop human beings. But to educate and develop human beings and to be better human beings. Look, build a better human being, they will build a better organization, and so doing will build a better business.
That's excellent, and there's some people here showing interest in how that could be incorporated more into education rather than waiting until people get to the workplace to do that, which is actually a pet peeve of mine. If we look at the education system and what they're teaching, it's the things that are being taught for historical reasons, not because anyone sat down recently and really thought about what are the things that really create success in life. So, for example, emotional intelligence and the ability to interact well with other human beings, one is a very strong determinant of individual success, much stronger than the traditional IQ. So the people with the emotional intelligence are the ones who are most likely to be successful in life, first and foremost. And second of all, in group settings, a group can always outthink the smartest person in that group, always get better answers than the smartest person in that group, if the people in the group have and are using their emotional intelligence skills. If they're not using their emotional intelligence skills, if they're not taking turns listening to one another and doing other basic courtesies, then you can get into a situation where the group will actually wind up being stupider than the dumbest person in the group, and you get like crazy pathological groupthink. So emotional intelligence, it's sort of a shame that we have to wait and train people in this when they're already leaders in an organization.
Yeah, it's I couldn't agree with you more. I mentor 6 second-year MBA students every year at the University of Washington, and they're all bright, and otherwise they couldn't get into the program, and none of them are kids. They're 25 to 40 years old, and at our very first meeting, the first question that I ask is I go around the table and said, tell me what your top 1, 2, or 3 core values are, and how those core values inform your life and the decisions that you make and the actions that you take. It's fascinating to me that probably out of, probably close to 100 people, that I've had maybe 2 or 3 that could really articulate that. And that says a lot. And what it says to me is that, are we producing great doctors, lawyers, and fire chiefs, and whatever, and nurses, etc.? Probably, yeah. Are we producing better human beings? I would say probably not.
And since you gave me the invitation, I'll put you on the spot. What are your core values, Howard, your personal ones?
My first, I have 8 core values. I won't go through them all, but my first core value is honesty. And what, like I said in the interview, honesty, I redefine honesty. Now, honesty to me, certainly the core things about honesty are we don't take things that don't belong to us, but I can't tell you that I always lived my life like that. I didn't as a young person. But honesty today means is putting myself out there. You ask me a question, you may not like my answer, you may disagree with my answer, but I can tell you that I will give you what I'm thinking and what I feel at that moment. It doesn't mean that I won't change, but that's the core, that I'm not going to smoke you. I'm not, the goal for me in my life at almost 70 years old, I'm not building a resume. I'm not trying to look good, And it's okay if we disagree, and it's okay if you think I'm, whatever you think. But so, and then the second one would be trust. I grew up in a household with a mother that was an immigrant from Latvia. She was raised Jewish, and it was hard for her to trust for a lot of reasons. Fiddler on the Roof was her life story, and she saw brothers get killed and all those kinds of things. And so she was always wary of others, particularly non-Jewish people. And that rubbed off on me for the longest time. And I finally realized that it was affecting my life. It was affecting how I wanted to live. And I made a decision that what trust was going to mean to me is that I always gave trust first. I didn't worry about whether people had earned it, deserved it. I just said, I'm going to trust everybody. And then the people had to unearn my trust. So anyway, those are a couple, but those are two at the top.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll just say briefly, without explaining them, that my three are love, truth, and evolution, and they inform all my decision making and everything that I do. We've got some other interesting questions. People are really, a lot of the folks on the call are looking at this from a systems angle, and an interesting systems question about business and the stuff you're talking about is, doesn't the emphasis on competition actually stand in somewhat contrast to what you're saying, that if we're constantly creating systems in which we want not only organizations to compete with one another, but the way we set up raises, bonuses, etc., causes people to compete with one another internal to the organization, isn't that actually contradictory to the type of environment? Like, I don't have my kids compete to see who can get more food at dinner, for example. Doesn't that emphasis on competition stand in contrast and undermine what you're saying?
I would say there's a couple different kinds of competition. One is constructive, one is destructive. Destructive competition absolutely destroys an organization. And what destructive competition is about I win, you lose. And you set up, bosses set it up so that people don't want to help each other, they don't want to work together. They truly are in a kill or be killed mode, and you see that in organizations.
I think Microsoft recently had there was an article written on them in a women's magazine, I forget which one, about how they had done a forced ranking every year from the very top to the very bottom of the organization, every single person in a list from 1 to N, and it caused immense destruction to their culture.
Yeah, that was an old Jack Welch GE model and a Pepsi model at one time. I don't think there's a problem with evaluating people's performance, but evaluate their performance based on where they are and what is expected of them. Also, the real world says in a work environment that I can reward people. I can reward the people who do the best. These words aren't right. Create the best business, serve customers. Well, I can do that. I don't have to do it in a way that's destructive to other people. Right? I don't have to say anything to anybody else. If I reward well and it's authentic and honest to the people that are getting the job done, other people understand. But constructive competition is letting people know. I had it's an interesting personal experience. I retired from Starbucks and I came back to Starbucks, and my son happened to have gotten a job at Starbucks, even though I told him that he shouldn't. I said, those kind of father-son things in a public company, they don't work very well. But anyway, somebody liked him and hired him, and he did a good job. And but he was in my work group, which caused some issues, but we separated out his performance evaluation. I didn't do it. Somebody else did it that didn't report to me and was my peer. But I was setting up, I had set up a goal in the organization, and it was a goal to increase sales, and it was a goal that I just made up. I call it was 150 and 3, and that was to increase average unit volume by 150,000 in 3 years. And when I said to the people, the team, and there was about 30, 40 people on the team, I said, the people that are going to get resources are the people that are able to figure out how to move us towards that goal. And he got mad at me. My son got mad at me. He said, you're setting me up to compete with the other person. I said, yeah, it's true, Scott, because this organization has to perform, and performance counts in this world. Like it or not, performance counts. And I said, it's not going to be destructive. Nobody's going to get fired over this, but people are going to get rewarded based on how they contribute to the goal. And each has their own role, but you have to perform. And, we did it in a constructive way, in a caring way, but, I didn't say, hey, the people that don't perform, they're going to have to be packing their bags. I mean, some people did they get let go, but it wasn't for that issue. It was for over a long, protracted period of time not being able to perform.
Yeah, and that makes a certain amount of sense that it's sort of a more natural form of, I mean, the destruct is, it's a fine line between there, and it gets very destructive when I start to say, okay, well, here's you and here's how you did, and here's Sally over here and how she did, and so she did better than you, and she's going to get a bigger bonus than you, and that kind of comparing is very harmful in human relationships.
I mean, it shouldn't be a conversation. It has nothing to do. Sally and Bill are two individual people. Now, if Sally is just blowing the cover off the ball and doing things that nobody else has done, then I'm going to recognize Sally, and I'm going to make sure Sally gets rewarded. And if Bill doesn't, then Bill is not. But there's a certain level of performance that needs to be done, and if you can't get to that, then you probably got to find something, some job, some company, some organization where you can. But not everybody is equal. And another interesting thing about this that we don't talk about very much is that we're always moving around in terms of performance. If tomorrow you or I, God forbid, woke up in the morning and our wives or spouses or significant others went to the doctor and found out that they had cancer. They came home and we sit down, we talk about it. That's going to affect our performance. It really will, at least in some time period, because our lives are shaken up. And organizations have to make room for that. And leaders have to understand where their people are. Now, that can't be an endless reason, but we do have to take into account the issues that we face, and it's the way it is.
Yep. Great. Well, Howard, thank you so much for all this time. We've even run over a few minutes. I really appreciate you making time for these great questions we've been getting. And thank you so much for this. And is there any parting words you want to say to the viewers?
All of this is difficult. This is not easy. It's not easy being a human being. It's not easy living in the world in which we live. And we're going to all make mistakes. We're going to all do the wrong thing. We're not going to act in accordance with our values every day. We're not going to perform at the levels that that others expect of us, or that we have to learn to love ourselves unconditionally even during those times. It's hard, but that's what we need to do. And that means that we have to accept the mistakes that others make, our bosses make, our significant others make as well. And if we can find ways to be forgiving every day, even while holding our expectations high, we can create a better world.
Great, thank you. And just a little feedback for you. That your tendencies towards talk and towards honesty, I think, makes you a very effective messenger. And I'm really grateful that people get to hear your message and to incorporate that into their leadership and help us all create the new paradigm. Thank you, Howard.
Thanks, Tim.